Today we have as panelists the Honorable Patrick Shanahan, Acting Secretary of Defense, and General Joseph Dunford, Jr., U.S. Marine Corps, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'll forego an opening statement. I know we've already held you up some today, and recognize Senator Durbin.
I'll follow the chairman's example. Proceed, Mr. Chairman.
General Dunford, your written statement will be made part of the record. The written statements will be made part of the record. You proceed as you wish.
Sure. Chairman Shelby, Vice Chairman Durbin, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of the President's budget request for fiscal year 2020. I'm joined today by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, and the Department's Comptroller and Chief Financial Officer, Mr. David Norquist. I must begin by recognizing General Dunford for his more than 4 decades of service. This morning likely marks his last congressional testimony before his retirement. General Dunford, on behalf of the entire Department of Defense, thank you for your gifted and selfless leadership. Simply put, our nation is far safer because of your unwavering dedication, and it has been a privilege and an honor to serve alongside you. It has also been a great privilege and honor to serve alongside all of the men and women of the Department of Defense. And it was a pleasure to work with Secretary Mattis to craft the 2018 National Defense Strategy. Released in January of 2018, that strategy laid the foundation for restoring military readiness and modernizing our joint force for an era of great power competition. I now oversee the continued execution of that strategy, which is the undisputed driver of today's budget request. It was extremely helpful for the department to receive authorization and appropriation bills on time and at the requested top line last year, which marked the first time in a decade a defense appropriations has been enacted by the beginning of the fiscal year. The strategy you supported last year is the same strategy we are asking you to fund this year. The $750 billion top line for national defense enables DOD to maintain irregular warfare as a core competency, yet prioritizes modernization and readiness to compete, deter, and win in a high-end fight of the future. This budget is critical for the continued execution of our strategy, and it reflects difficult but necessary decisions that align finite resources, 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 but necessary decisions that align finite resources. It also increases our total end strength by roughly 7,700 service members and provides a 3.1% pay increase to our military, the largest in a decade. Now to the specifics. The top line slates $718 billion for the Department of Defense. Of that total, the budget includes $545 billion for base funding, $164 billion for overseas contingency operations. Of the OCO funds, $66 billion will go to direct war and enduring requirements, and $98 billion to fund base requirements. To round out the numbers, $9.2 billion will fund emergency construction, including support for hurricane recovery and border barrier efforts. Here I must note the Department appreciates this committee's support for hurricane recovery. Thank you for approving the $600 million reprogramming, which will help start our recovery efforts. I ask for your support for a hurricane supplemental to address the remaining $1.8 billion in critical facilities, restoration, modernization, and sustainment, maintenance, and equipment replacement needs for FY19, as well as the budget request of $3 billion in military construction and operation maintenance to continue recovery efforts in FY20. As this committee fully understands, no enemy in the field has done more damage to our military's combat readiness in years past than sequestration and budget instability. And there is no question today our adversaries are not relenting. In short, we cannot implement the NDS at sequestration levels. Sequestration will not only halt our progress in rebuilding levels. Sequestration will not only halt our progress in rebuilding levels. Sequestration will not only halt our progress in rebuilding levels. Sequestration will not only halt our progress in rebuilding levels. Sequestration will not only halt our progress in rebuilding levels. Sequestration will not only halt our progress in rebuilding levels. Sequestration, we cannot start new initiatives, including increased investments in cyber, nuclear modernization, and missile defense I just mentioned. Second, our funding would be in the wrong accounts. And third, we would lose buying power. We built this budget to implement our national defense strategy, and I look forward to working with you to ensure predictable funding so our military can remain the most lethal, adaptable, and resilient fighting force in the world. I appreciate the critical role Congress plays to ensure our warfighters can succeed on the battlefields of today and tomorrow. And I thank our service members, their families, and all those in the Department of Defense for maintaining constant vigilance as they stand always ready to protect our freedoms. Thank you.
General Dunford.
Chairman Shelby, Vice Chairman Durbin, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to join Secretary Shanahan and Secretary Norquist. I remain honored to represent your soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Well, much of the discussion this morning is going to focus on the challenges we face. I want to begin by assuring you that your armed forces can today deter a nuclear attack, defend the homeland, meet our alliance commitments, and effectively respond should deterrence fail. I believe we have a competitive advantage against any potential adversary, defined as the ability to project power and win at the time and place of our choosing. But as members of this committee know, 17 years of continuous combat and fiscal instability have affected our readiness and eroded our competitive advantage. And Chairman, Secretary Shanahan went through the details of the budget, so I'll forego that and let the rest of my remarks be covered in the statement I've submitted for the record, and I look forward to your questions.
Without objection, so ordered. Much. I'll have several questions, and the others I'll ask to be put in the record, and hope you, for the record, and ask you to answer them for the committee. It's been about a year since the Department of Defense received its first request from the Department of Homeland Security. As the border and humanitarian conditions have evolved over the past several months, you have received multiple additional requests to include support for construction of a physical barrier and additional support from the National Guard. It's my understanding that there have been 7 requests, at least so far. Secretary Shanahan, could you tell us here, give us an update on the status of DOD's operations at the border, as well as provide your best judgment of how much support you could provide without negatively affecting other DOD missions?
Chairman, let me start with characterizing our support to the border in maybe 3 areas. The first being building of the barrier, the second being the request for assistance that you described, and then the capabilities that we intend to enable within the Department of Homeland Security. So in terms of the border barrier itself, the Army Corps of Engineers has a responsibility to build the barrier. We now have on contract sufficient funds to build about 256 miles of barrier. Over the course, just to give you a sense of 256 miles. And that represents DHS funds from 17 and 18, as well as federal or Treasury forfeiture funds, as well as reprogramming. How you will see this materialize in the next 6 months is in about 63 additional new miles of wall will come online, so about a half a mile a day will be produced. The RFAs, as you described about a year ago, we received our first request, and I think as of this morning we have 4,364 troops on the border. It's a mixture of Guard and active. The primary role is doing monitor and detection, of which we have approximately 1,167 performing that mission, but we have a broader set of missions which range from logistical support to aviation support, food service. I mean, there's the whole host of those. We, to more broadly answer your question, in terms of readiness, we've seen no degradation to readiness. In fact, in some cases, it's enhanced our readiness because the troops get to perform certain functions. And then the chairman and I, and maybe ask the chairman to describe how we're supporting DHS. I mean, we have a history in the department of doing border control. And we've supplemented DHS with leadership so we can address how to more effectively control the southwest border. Chairman, maybe you could provide a little commentary.
Chairman, what we did was we have there's a position on the Joint Staff Assistant to the Chairman, and that individual typically supports the Secretary of State. We've offered him up to the Secretary of Homeland Security to put together an interagency planning team. As the Secretary said, although the commitment to the border hasn't impacted our preparedness for other missions at this point, what we wanted to do is get into a more predictable mode of the requirements that the Department of Homeland Security has and do better at integrating across the government. So we provided a 2-star plus a number of planners to the Department of Homeland Security so that we can lay out the next couple of years based on the assumptions of the numbers of migrants that we'll find at our border, based on the capacity of Homeland Security and their growth over time, and then obviously based on the support that they'll need from the rest of the government. So what we're hopeful to do is to have, in fairly short order for the Secretary of Homeland Security, a much more predictable, comprehensive plan for the next couple of years.
Not reached any agreement on the budget for fiscal year 2020 that would include funding, of course, for the Department of Defense, which is our priority here. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. We're working at it. Senator Durbin and I will be on top of it, but could be a long haul this year, as you well know. I have a number of questions I'm going to submit for the record in where we can move on. Dealing with China, advanced information networks, dealing with hypersonic missile investments. You're very familiar with all of this. Concerning the technological edge that we cannot cede to China or to Russia or anybody. If we do, we do it at our own peril. Do you agree with that, Ms.? And a Space Development Agency on this. We'll get into this too and some questions. Other than that, I want to recognize Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Shanahan, thank you for being here, and let me join in the chorus of praise for General Dunford. General, thank you for your many years of service to our country. I mean it from my heart. Secretary, we just received last week a supplemental funding request of $377 million to pay for the last year's involvement of the Department of Defense and the Southwest Border Mission. It's very clear this mission is going to continue into the next fiscal year. So why is there nothing in the President's budget request to continue funding this mission?
This was the essence of the comment General Dunford was making. We really need a more formalized plan, and I'll be working with Acting Secretary McAleenan to ensure we identify the appropriate resources so that we can sustain the appropriate level of effort.
There was a statement that's been made publicly by Department of Defense and others about a clear line of demarcation between the mission of the Department of Homeland Security and the mission of the Department of Defense. Yeah. The longer this Southwest Border mission continues, the line of demarcation starts to blur in terms of where we're drawing a line saying this is not a military responsibility, this is law enforcement, immigration, internal security responsibility. What assurance can you give us that this age-old line of demarcation will be respected?
Yeah, there'll never be a blurring of the line in terms of law enforcement. We do not provide law enforcement. We never have. We never will. Our role is to support DHS.
I know it is, but let me ask you specifically. I understand that HHS has visited 8 Department of Defense installations looking for sites to house unaccompanied children. They include Great Lakes Naval Station in my home state of Illinois. So in this relationship between HHS and the Department of Defense, where do things stand with their request for military housing?
They've made requests to us to provide housing. Our role in providing housing to them would be turnkey. So if there's something that's identified that we agree to support, we would prepare and then hand the keys over to HHS.
When will the decision be made as to whether military housing will be provided?
I'm going to ask David Norquist to answer that question. David?
Let me take it for the record in terms of when we have that.
For the record, okay. Secretary Shanahan, last week many of us participated in a classified briefing on threats in space. We certainly have incredible capabilities in space, and there's no doubt that we need to protect them. However, it's not clear how the proposal for a space force would improve the effectiveness of 15,000 space professionals who are currently on the job. Why does it make more sense to establish a $2 billion Space Force bureaucracy within the Air Force or separate from it? Would it be better use of taxpayers' dollars to invest that funding into new satellites, new rockets, and new approaches?
Thank you for that question. The $2 billion, in my view, is overstated. I think that detracts from the real value of the Space Force. The fundamental proposition of the Space Force is, given the change in the environment that space is now contested, is the status quo sufficient? It isn't. The Space Force represents two significant changes. One is provide the command authority when it comes to protecting our economy and our defense assets. That's a fundamental change in mission, that we resource that. And then secondarily, how do we deploy new capability that isn't burdened by red tape and leverages so much of the commercial innovation that's occurred in space? And maybe I'd ask Chairman Dunford for his comments from the perspective of, he's seen the Pentagon face problems before, and our approach generally is we react after something negative has occurred. I really think we're on the front end of helping to ensure that we sustain our competitive advantage. Chairman?
Vice Chairman Durbin, what I would say is that an organization that is singularly focused on recruiting people, training people, the path of capability development, the doctrine in space, has a better chance of giving us the kind of focus that I believe we need. I've watched this now over the last couple of years. I've been on my own personal journey on the Space Force to make a recommendation. In 2017, I wasn't convinced that we needed a Space Force. Over time, I have been convinced, based on the eroding competitive advantage we have vis-a-vis China and Russia in particular, and what I see to be the future, the interdependencies we have, that an organization, again, that has that singular focus would posture the department to better deal with one of only 5 domains that we have in our warfighting doctrine.
I'm going to close with one question, and at the risk of spoiling your plans to publish a book, I'm going to ask you, after 40 years of service in our military at the highest levels of leadership, what is it as your part that you would point to as the most significant development or significant challenge that we face?
You know, Vice Chairman, first, there's no danger of spoiling the book that won't be written. I can assure you of that. But the one thing that, I came in, my Painter base date is 1975. So I was around as a platoon commander during the Vietnam days. And so when people talk about a hollow force, I was actually on active duty in 1980 when it was a hollow force. And what we had was an imbalance between our people, our training, and our equipment. And I have lived through now the development of the force that we have today. And I give our Vietnam veterans a lot of credit for rebuilding the force after Vietnam and the force we have today. And I would just tell you that the single biggest change I saw was a qualitative change in the people that we have on active duty from the 1980s, 1990s, and through today. And I think the men and women that we have today, in terms of their intellect, in terms of their fitness, in terms of their commitment, is really the most important thing we have. And I think we all know that, but I walk away having that lesson reaffirmed to me over the last couple of years.
Chairman, thank you. General Dunford and Secretary Shanahan, thank you for being here. General Dunford, thank you for your service to our nation. My understanding is this is your 26th budget hearing. My condolences for that aspect of your career. But I do want to pay tribute to you and express gratitude on behalf of all Kansas and Americans for your lifelong service to our country. You and I met for the very first time in the Oval Office, but it was the Oval Office at the Reagan Defense Forum. And I remember it well, and pleased to be there and to get acquainted with you. I want to ask my question, if I have time for more than one, I want to ask at least my first question to the Secretary. Mr. Secretary, according to an October 2018 GAO report, the Department of Defense, I'm quoting, the Department of Defense faces mounting challenges in protecting its weapons systems from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. We met almost a year ago to discuss this topic, cyber vulnerabilities in weapon systems, and relying on, the fact is that we rely on less than a dozen red teams across the services that are NSA certified to conduct threat analysis and assessments of DOD systems. You and I had a productive conversation, and the Director for Operational Test and Evaluation formally documented in their annual report much of what we discussed, recommending red team capacity and retention options must be increased to meet the demands of testing, training, and other assessment activities. However, these red teams, in my view, and I would think in yours, lack programmatic funding to adequately staff, train, and equip them to emulate advanced cyber threats. And as you know, DOT&E has sought increases in red team capacity in the past, but the construct does not exist to appropriately program those resources. So, Mr. Secretary, would you support investing in red team integrated capabilities to ensure programmatic funding for personnel training and cyber ranges and tools for the red cyber team community? And in addition, would you support a scholarship for service program like the National Science Foundation to create cyber warrior pipeline through universities to direct and employ scholarship to this service?
Senator, I would support all those efforts. The comment that I would provide along with this is our biggest challenge with the red teams is keeping the people. They are so talented and in such high demand that we really get out recruited. So, you know, anything we can do to generate capacity is extremely critical. And as you know, these red teams parachute, if you will, into different installations and conduct these attacks so we can assess the vulnerabilities. So we have red teams, but in addition to that, at a department level, we've taken a risk-based approach to identify what are the most critical risks, and then how do we deliberately mitigate those as a complement to those red teams?
Well, Mr. Secretary, your comment, your return comment to me allows me to highlight the National Guard's role. Mm-hmm. I would indicate in Wichita, Kansas, our National Guard, Air Force National Guard unit is a red cyber team and is certified. And it is an aspect that I think sometimes is forgotten, in which you have men and women serving in careers outside the Guard who then devote their time and energy inside the Guard, and it allows them to have experiences both places and income from the private sector that augments the opportunity for the active military to attract and retain those individuals.
We've found, particularly in the area of cyber, in the Guard, a tremendous number of people that are working in the industry, and it's also a real source of innovation for the active.
I also want to raise one more topic. I don't have a clock in front of me, but I assume I'm still within my 5 minutes. A concern worth examining is that when a cyber vulnerability is found, who's responsible for the fix and mitigation? What entity then comes and says, this is what we're going to do, and is responsible for the outcome?
There, as you can imagine, in the department, we have, just put it in perspective, 3 million endpoints. So when we talk about vulnerabilities, you know, the network is extremely large and complex. So there's a variety of responsibilities across the organization for identifying those and retiring those risks. So there's not a singular organization that has responsibility. I think our focus has been to elevate the responsibility of everyone and then change our policies to be that the network now is going to become zero trust. So we assume that it's always under attack, and we're changing our procedures so that we can authenticate anyone who's on the network and authenticate all of those devices, because I think just relying on someone to police it, doesn't give us the comprehensive coverage that we need.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. General Dunford, thank you.
Senator Leahy.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin and Chairman Shelby. Thank you, Acting Secretary Shanahan, and of course, General Dunford. I know this is your last appearance here, and I thank you formally on the record for that. I intend to be speaking at greater length on the floor of the Senate. I'm praising you. I won't do that here because I don't want to embarrass the heck out of you in front of everybody, but I think you've been an example of what our military should be and our people in uniform should be, and I'm proud that my youngest son wore the same uniform but didn't have all these stars on the shoulder. Acting Secretary Shanahan, I have serious concern with the President's proposed border wall and his use of a national emergency declaration to fund it. I think it's an end run around this committee and the Constitution because the power of the purse is in the Congress. It's especially offensive the President wants to raid funds that this committee has voted for to other projects that would support our service members and their families in military missions around the world. We thought that through, got a bipartisan vote to support military around the world. I don't think DOD should be canceling important support facilities such as schools and medical clinics, important to military spouses and children, to fund this pet proposal. If the department decides to cancel projects that we've given funding for so they can go to the wall, I support those projects. Don't expect me to support them a second time around. We have to make choices here all the time. And if I'm voted for a project and then it turns out the Department of Defense isn't going to spend it, even though they requested it, is going to go to the wall. As one senator, I'm not going to vote for additional funds to replace those projects, needy as they are. So when will Congress be informed which projects or any, if any, will be deferred or canceled in order to fund the wall?
Well, in terms of when the Congress would be informed, the process right now is we have two steps. We have the authority under 284, and then we have the one you're referencing, which is the military construction under 2808. The Secretary put out direction about a month ago asking the Chairman and the Joint Chiefs of Staff to look at the requirements for that and make sure it met the legal requirements. That report, to answer your question, that report is due to him, I think, in the next few days this week, and that will give him the basis of the information that the Secretary would need to make a decision.
Because I asked this question, we asked, for example, the folks from Camp Lejeune, which had enormous damage. We voted for money to repair it. Is that money going to be taken? I just use that as one example. I've been to Camp Lejeune. My son trained there at Camp Lejeune, and I've seen what the devastation is there. Is there going to be money there? Can you tell us that our men and women in uniform and their families are not going to be adversely affected by these canceled projects?
So for the project,
There's been a lot on TV, for example, housing that's got mold and vermin and so on.
Sure. So the issues that relate to housing, those aren't funded through the military construction account. Those would not be affected. Those are ones where there are contractors responsible for meeting those standards, and the services have processes in place to hold them to those standards.
What about readiness? Will anything be detracting from our readiness?
So with regard to readiness, the focus of the process is to ensure that if we have to identify projects to become sources, we look at ones that don't start till later. As you pointed out, there's a request pending for the additional funding to backfill it, and that will become the
Yeah, but that's where you may have some problem.
Understood.
If we funded it once and you take the money away, it's going to be hard to see them compete with other projects later on. The money may well not be there. General Dunford, Acting Secretary Shanahan was in my office yesterday. We talked about my trip to Vietnam, which I think was successful. We had 8 Republican and Democratic senators who joined, saw firsthand security cooperation value of Da Nang and Bien Hoa Air Base, the remediation projects, which I've discussed with you and I've discussed with Ms. Shanahan, your predecessor. And I realize we're an open hearing, but can you discuss the strategic value of increased security cooperation with the government of Vietnam? General?
Senator Leahy, thanks. I'd start by telling you that in our national military strategy, when we looked at our source of strength, we said it was a network of allies and partners that we have since World War II. And so when we look at the Pacific and we talk about a free and open Indo-Pacific, our strategy there, you'd have to consider Vietnam as a critical partner in ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific. And what we seek in the Pacific, of course, is a group of like-minded nations that will collectively act to ensure that we maintain international law, open access to the global commons, and in a legal way of addressing territorial disputes. And so I think Vietnam in those areas has indicated a shared interest in a free and open Indo-Pacific. And so I think Vietnam is very important in that regard.
Sending our aircraft carrier there must have sent quite a signal throughout that part of the world.
Senator, I think what it sent was a signal of the relationship between the United States and Vietnam, but more importantly, again, it was a physical manifestation of Vietnam's agreement with us on how we ought to address that free and open Indo-Pacific.
When we went to Bien Hoa, and of course where the U.S. is helping clean that up, there was a strong feeling from the Vietnamese that that's a strong indication from us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Blunt?
Thank you, Chairman. Back to another Space Force question, and it may not be in this budget yet, but on the National Reconnaissance Organization, a sort of shared entity between Intel and Defense that largely has been run, I think, as an Intel entity, but with full Defense access. I would have some concern about the unique character of that organization changing, and wonder from either General Dunford or the Secretary if what's the thought process on the National Reconnaissance Organization?
Senator, the integration in terms of the information and the data that we would share is, to me, the most vital piece that we have to protect. So as we continue to invest in new capability, assume for today that the organizations remain separate. The ability to share and pass information timely and effectively is what the Space Force really works to address. And so when Betty Sapp was there, and now with Sue Gordon, whether we want to call it formally or informally, on a technical basis, we've remained aligned. We don't know how organizationally things will evolve in the future, but it's so important that we build the pipes, if you will, so that there is no latency and delay in how we share information. Because in the future, where artificial intelligence is so critical, it's getting the data to the algorithms. And so building that network is where I think the Space Force and staying aligned is so important.
Well, I think those are obviously the right goals. I just think there's a uniqueness here. I don't know, General Dunford, if there are any Title 10, Title 50 issues that get more confused if it goes under a new entity, either the Space Force or any of the defense unique components, but that would be one of the concerns I have as well.
Senator, I think one of the reasons why we left this to a later discussion is for the very reason you talk about. First of all, if you just start here with Congress, the oversight committees are different and the funding streams are different when you talk about Title 50 money and really the funding streams that go to NRO. But I would emphasize to the Secretary, that's the way I think about it. And we have over the last few years, built an integrated operations center. So we have shared situational awareness. We have shared, operations and support. And I think, I share the view of the Secretary that whatever we do, we just need to achieve that end state. That's what's most important.
And I believe what you're both saying is that that's the way it's working now. So thinking carefully about this, if the goal we want to achieve is to be sure we continue to have
That's right.
ongoing forward movement in what we have now would be important. I'm left to vote just as Senator Moran was asking his questions about cyber, and I don't want to be too redundant here, but I have two questions about cyber. One is the authorization for cyber offense, relatively new, about maybe a year ago, maybe a little more, maybe almost two. But relatively new, and anything you want to say about that and anything that this budget does that impacts your ability to recruit our cyber personnel would be interesting to me.
Maybe the first question that you had, the authorities are extremely important because we need a deterrence. Building thicker castle walls and higher castle walls is not the way to survive in this with this new cyber threat, and the threat continues to grow. So having a deterrent effect is very important. And that's why the offensive authorities are critical.
And you now have those.
We do.
Right. And cyber warriors, how hard are they to find, and what are we doing to find them?
Well, I was going to say this budget has a double-digit increase in terms of resources to cybercom, and I've spent a considerable amount of time with General Nakasone, not just simply on how do we generate more cyber warriors. I mean, that really is a jewel that's been created there in NSA and cybercom. So, retention there really comes from how you treat your people, and he's really a supreme leader in that regard. The budget, I think, reflects a prudent investment in the capabilities that we're going to need in the future in terms of encryption and quantum. And as this threat continues to evolve, it is just like space, an area where we need to make the right investments for the technologies that won't mature for another 5 or 7 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, on Sunday evening, the National Security Advisor announced that the U.S. is deploying a carrier strike group and a bomber task force to CENTCOM in response to a number of troubling and escalatory indications and warnings involving Iran. The threats were apparently significant enough not only to surge additional military capabilities in the region, but for Secretary Pompeo to cancel a meeting with Prime Minister Merkel and go to Iraq. But it took the department more than 2 days to share any information with the Congressional Defense Committees, and I sit on both. And frankly, I think that's unacceptable. If this is a serious situation requiring a response of this nature, we should be informed. So why were we not informed in a detailed and timely manner, and when will we receive a detailed, presumably classified briefing on what's happening?
Maybe I can give you just an evolution of the course of events, and then we always owe you timely information. So, I mean, I think that's a responsibility we have here, and I believe Chairman Dunford has some time with you this afternoon. I would imagine he can give you a detailed update, but this is just, let me give you kind of a characterization of the events. Thursday morning, we were working in Venezuela with a whole of government. We received the indications and this very, very credible intelligence on Friday afternoon. We went to work understanding the sources and to get the teams turning on what does it mean and how might we respond. And I went for a run, and then Chairman Dunford called me up and said North Korea was now shooting rockets and missiles. Saturday, the chairman and I went through the intelligence with General McKenzie from CENTCOM, and it was really Sunday afternoon that you came back and said, here's what we're recommending. I need authority to proceed. I then coordinated with State Department and NSC, so it was really Sunday night before any real information was put together. So in an ideal situation, we would give you an update. You know, on Monday, I guess it's Wednesday, we should be more timely. Chairman, any?
Senator Reid, the reporting notwithstanding, I just want you to know our focus over the weekend was to deter, we saw the intelligence, and so we sent some messages on Friday to make sure that it was clear to Iran that we recognized the threat and we were postured to respond to the threat. And then what I asked the Secretary for on Sunday, eventually Lincoln would have made its way to the Gulf. What I asked really was to accelerate the movement of the Lincoln and the Bomber Task Force so that there would be no ambiguity about our preparedness to respond to any threat against our people or our partners in the region. And that's why we worked pretty hard to do that, because what we didn't want to do is be in a position to respond. We wanted to make sure that we took as much action as we could over the weekend to actually deter that. But I understand your point on the reporting piece.
Let me, Mr. Secretary, follow up with another question. Before Easter, I traveled to Iraq and Afghanistan, had the opportunity to meet with the President of Afghanistan, the Chief Executive of Afghanistan. In Iraq, I saw among several local leaders, the Prime Minister and the President. All of them suggested that the designation of the IRGC as a terrorist group was provocative and destabilizing. So that is for the record. But let me ask you, are you aware of any evidence that the IRGC or any other Iranian group is a associated force of al-Qaeda? Associated force being a key provision of the AUMF? Do you have any evidence of that? If you don't want to answer in open session, that's quite all right.
Yeah, I think if we could do it in a closed environment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see Secretary Shanahan. We appreciate your leadership, and General Dunford, it's always good to hear you come and talk about how we can be a more lethal, effective fighting machine. Over the past 6 months, our services have dedicated a significant amount of resources to hurricane recovery. On our military installations, President Trump, I believe, is at Tyndall today, touring that facility. I'm going to be traveling to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina to inspect the damage there. Our military bases are still waiting on disaster relief from Congress as our service members continue to operate in poor conditions. Can you give us an update on the impact of the aid you all have received so far, if any, and what more is still needed? And then following up on that, if Congress doesn't pass a disaster aid package soon, how will that affect our readiness, which, again, is the name of the game?
Yeah. So as the services respond to a hurricane, they have the immediate evacuation, then they've got to go through and assess the property, trying to do the repairs that they can do. They want to take care of all the folks who've been displaced. All of these consume resources that were not originally programmed for that purpose. And so when Congress provided the support, when this committee in particular provided support for that reprogramming for both the Air Force and the Marine Corps, that allowed them to continue those operations because there's only a limited amount they can take from others, from the other accounts. The supplemental that the Congress is considering would be another very significant step forward in allowing them, particularly as we're dealing with facility sustainment, repair, and maintenance, which is this year's biggest requirement. As you look out over the next few years, they're going to have to start doing rebuilding. So there's about $2 billion in our request in 20 for the military construction to support that, and there'll be some that follows. But that additional support prevents them from basically disrupting training, delaying the repair and maintenance of the existing facilities, which they'd have to do in terms of realigning the funds.
Right.
So we greatly appreciate that support.
Yeah, but generally, supplementals come through in a short period of time. This is not coming through. What's happening now? What's going to be the effect if we don't get this done soon?
So what they end up doing is stopping repair and maintenance of other facilities across the country, and they start looking at potential training that would have to be affected at year end.
So are we at that point now?
I believe we are. I believe the Air Force has started to implement some of those controls even now.
Yeah, very good.
Like many states, Arkansas has been hit hard by suicide. Service members, veterans, military families have all been victim. It's a top priority, certainly, of all of us at the committee. I assume it's the top priority at DOD. As Acting Secretary of Defense, how are you working together with Secretary Wilkie to spearhead the Veterans Wellness Empowerment and Suicide Prevention Task Force? And do you have any updates for us?
As for the task force, I don't have any specific updates on the task force itself. The integration of the department, how we transition people between the DOD and the VA is critical. That's a high priority area for Secretary Wilkie and ourselves. The collaboration is vital, but also the work that we do in the department. And second, I'll ask Chairman Dunford just to provide a perspective on what's changed over his career, because I think he's got some unique insights. But in the department, we've fundamentally deployed forward more mental health professionals. We also know that these issues aren't just about mental health. It's about being able to get support for when people have relationship problems or financial issues. So we've really expanded, our how we address suicide more broadly than just simply mental health. Chairman?
Senator, when I first really worked on this issue institutionally, I was Assistant Commandant in the Marine Corps back in 2010. And at the time, we had a very stovepiped approach to delivering mental health care. And so I think there's probably two things that I think are promising developments. The first is the multidisciplinary approach to healthcare. And now when an individual seeks help, it's not a point-to-point. They see the psychiatrist, that doesn't work. They see the psychologist, that doesn't work. They see a social worker, that doesn't work. There's a multidisciplinary approach where an individual is managed by a team that has the appropriate skills to deal with that individual's problem. The other challenge that we had was, I think, a misinterpretation in some cases of privacy associated with medical care, in the sense that we didn't have the kind of sharing of information across command teams, chaplains, medical professionals, so that when we had an individual who needed help, we could identify that individual and take proactive action. And I think those two things are among the promising initiatives, but I don't think any of us would say we're complacent with where we are, either with mental health as a whole or specifically with the scourge of suicide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with General Dunford, and I want to talk about Guam. General Neller and I had a good exchange in the subcommittee, and we've talked about this on and off for many, many years. The basic question is some of the assumptions that went into the Guam realignment were based on lift and the availability of training areas, and that is not currently in evidence. And I'm wondering whether the department is considering reevaluating the plan, understanding that we have a ironclad commitment to the government of Japan to follow through on our promise, but we don't have an ironclad commitment to do it stupidly. And if the purpose of having Marines forward is to have them ready to fight tonight, but they got to wait for lift from San Diego or Honolulu, then it really defeats the purpose and starts to look like an illogical plan. I'd like you to comment on that.
Senator, I would. In fact, probably just by coincidence, the Secretary and I are meeting today at 1600 on this issue, and I think there's really three main areas, and I think General Neller's probably talked about it. We have the aviation laydown, we have the infantry laydown, we have the artillery laydown, and there are challenges with the training in all three of those areas, and so we do have some things to discuss with the Secretary today. So as we move forward, as you say, the posture that we have, I make one key assumption, that it will be decades as we implement the DPRI, and we want to make sure we're going to do it right. So we'll talk to the Secretary about those two issues today. But I think your characterization for the members is fair. Two key assumptions. These go back to 2008, 2009. One was that we would have, when we moved significant forces down to Guam, that we would have training areas down there for the infantry forces that would be there. We haven't developed the access to those training areas as fast as we want. And of course, given the challenges we have in the Pacific, mobility remains a challenge, and we've got to look at increasing the capacity of our mobility in the area. But I can assure you it has the attention of the Secretary and I, and Secretary Spencer, Secretary of Navy, has had, I know, a number of conversations with the Secretary as well.
Yeah, maybe, can I just make one
sure,
comment
go
on
ahead,
this? This has really evolved out of the National Defense Strategy with the focus on China. And we're very cognizant of the decisions we're making in terms of construction, because they'll last 30 to 50 years. And so the timing isn't coincidental. We just recognize now, before we go make these investments in construction, let's finalize on what's the most effective use of these resources.
Absolutely. Let's stay in the Pacific. Admiral Davidson's plans for the Indo-Pacific rely, at least in part, on maintaining access to the compact states, Micronesia, the Marshalls, and Palau. What are we doing to help state and interior extend the agreements which expire in 2023?
I'm not current. I'll take for the record in terms of what we're doing there. The value of, like the Marshall Islands and Kwajalein are immensely important as we develop our missile defense capabilities. Working with Admiral Davidson to, just like the previous question you had, what is our thinking around where we want to put sensors? And as you know, the importance of these contributions to their GDP is very significant.
Right, but state has to get on this because 2023 is coming up, and obviously the Chinese are doing their influence campaign, which has to do as much with sort of geopolitics and an investment strategy as anything else. So if you, I will take that for the record. But next question, back to Tyndall. The Air Force goes through a strategic basing process, and what we're hearing, and I don't know that it's true, but what we're hearing is that there's a plan afoot to move to change Tyndall from an F-22 base to an F-35 base. And my question is, A, is that true? B, if so, is this going through the regular order within the Department of Defense and within the Department of the Air Force? Is this sort of flowing through the regular strategic basing process? Because just to be totally blunt, what we are hearing is that this is more of a political process that that is being fed from the White House down through the department, and that makes it more difficult for us to find our enthusiasm to fund this. And I'll add one last thing. The base was flattened. There's another base 50 miles away. This is, according to the department, the 9th most vulnerable base or installation in the United States to severe weather. And now, at least apparently because of a political commitment, we're looking at spending billions of dollars to rebuild an Air Force base 50 miles away from another Air Force base, both of which are vulnerable to severe weather. So can you reassure us that this is being done on the level?
I'll reassure you on the level in terms of rebuilding Tyndall. I mean,
what does that mean? I'm asking whether this is going. Hold on. I'm asking whether this is going through the strategic basing process in the regular order, or is this coming from the White House?
Right. On the F-35, I'll have to go back and look at it. This is a new development to me in terms of a basing decision on the F-22s versus the F-35. I do know that we want to preserve our presence in Florida because of the value of the test range where we conduct, all these flying missions.
And you don't think you could fly from the base 50 miles away to use that test range?
I'll get with Dr. Wilson and understand how she made that basing decision.
Okay, I'll take that for the record, and I'll take that as you're not sure whether this is being done through the regular order or not.
Well, I just want to validate how Dr. Wilson made that decision.
Thank you.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, let me first begin by thanking you for your many decades of dedicated service to our country. General, despite the administration's diplomatic efforts with North Korea, we still appear to be far apart in reaching an agreement on denuclearization. In March, it was announced that the Pentagon was canceling 2 additional large-scale military exercises with South Korea that were expected to be held this spring. I know that there are smaller scale exercises that are continuing to take place, but this cancellation concerns me. Do you believe that these smaller training exercises are adequate to maintain the readiness of our troops and allies, especially as tensions remain with North Korea's recent short-range missile tests this past weekend?
Senator, I'll start by saying that I am absolutely confident that the training program we have in place right now will allow us to do what we talk about in the United States Forces Korea, which is fight tonight. And I speak for General Abrams on the peninsula and Admiral Davison. We did revise the training program on the peninsula, and we used to conduct large-scale exercises for 2 reasons. One, very high profile to deter North Korea, and the others to maintain proficiency and conduct training. We have found other ways to do the training, and we've gone through each and every mission essential task of U.S. Forces Korea and Combined Forces Korea and put together a new program that's focused on the mission essential tasks and with admittedly a smaller profile in terms of deterrence to support the diplomatic track. But I would tell you, I am completely confident right now that the program that we have in place between exercises and training will allow us to maintain proficiency at the right levels.
Let me turn to a different issue. Many of us, in light of the Air Force's testimony last year, were surprised to see funding for F-15EXs in the budget. That seemed contradictory to what the Air Force said that it needs. Are you concerned that allocating funds to fourth-generation fighters, the F-15EXs, will prevent the Air Force from buying a sufficient number of F-35As needed to get to a 50% fifth-generation fleet in time to meet the threats from Russia and China?
Well, Senator, it's a great question, and this is an issue I looked at pretty hard. There were a number of variables that went into that decision. If I could, I'd just walk you through those and then answer the question about the F-35 ramp specifically. First, how much money we were going to spend overall on tactical aviation. Second, how many platforms we needed to have, capacity of the total fleet. Third was how much ordnance of what type we had to carry. And then the F-15C, which was not going to make it past the mid-2020s. And in our competitive area study, so this was a joint study, this wasn't a programmatic decision, this supported the Air Force's decision. We looked at a mix of fourth and fifth generation aircraft during that period of 2025 to 2035 to be the right mix of aircraft because of the way that the F-15EX could complement the fifth generation fighter. So we felt like a fifth generation, fourth generation mix would allow us to meet the war plan requirements. And by the way, we'll still be buying F-35s as fast as we can.
Thank you. Secretary Shanahan, last weekend, nearly 700 rockets were fired by militant groups in Gaza into Israel, which demonstrates the continued importance of the United States and Israel working together to deploy a multi-tiered missile defense system. We have put year after year after year with the support of virtually all of this committee, under the leadership of our chairman, significant resources behind programs such as Iron Dome, Arrow, David Sling. Do you see opportunities to increase our missile defense cooperation with Israel?
I do, and those investments, Arrow in particular, the Iron Dome, I think we're going to buy 2 batteries of Iron Dome. So when you think about, this is tactical missile defense. The capability that they've been able to deploy and mature has broader use than just in Israel. I think, the collaborative work between Missile Defense Agency and the Israeli Defense Forces has enormous benefit in the future, and I would continue to invest in that capability.
Benefits both countries.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have additional questions which I'd like to submit for the record.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, I'd like to talk a little bit about the nuclear provisions in the budget. Excuse me, I have a cold. As you know, the New START Treaty limits both Russia and the United States to 1,550 deployed warheads atop, excuse me, 700 deployed launchers. It's my understanding that both nations have met the treaty's limits in February of 2018 as required by the agreement. A CBO report in February estimates that the United States will spend $494 billion on nuclear weapons from FY19 through FY28. That's an increase of $94 billion, or 23% from the CBO's previous 10-year estimate of $400 billion, which was published in January of 2017. Now, the President's budget contains $10 million to finish production of a low-yield variant of a submarine-launched ballistic missile. And in 19, we appropriated $65 million for the program. The budget also includes $5 million to study the development of a new sea-launched cruise missile. The nuclear modernization continues. The request includes $2.2 billion for the Navy program to build 12 Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines, and the Air Force is seeking $3 billion to continue development of the B-21 Raider, and $713 million for the long-range LRSO program, and goes on and on. We are at our limit under the treaty, and my understanding is that the President has an interest of beginning some negotiations with both China and Russia. And my question is, where are we going with the nuclear program? The monies are so increased now that what they project to me is that there is a new interest in going beyond the New START treaty level. And I'd like to ask if you would be willing to engage in some conversation on that subject. I'm from the generation of the Daisy, if you remember, and at the very end of World War II and all that happened and all the fears, and have some concern that we go back to the kind of nuclear development that becomes easier and easier to use.
Senator, I'd love, Chairman, I'll tag team this, but maybe I can answer your question in kind of three segments.
Fine.
Arms control is vital. I mean, the New START treaty expires in February of 21, and we need to continue to make progress on that. The provisions of the treaty allow for an extension up to 5 years, so there's a backstop, if you will, if we don't make the progress to that February 2021 timeline. The New START treaty does not address new capabilities. So when we look at the weapons, some of the new weapons Russia is developing in their modernization program, we still have to address those. More broadly, though, we do need to deal with arms control. And when we put those original treaties in place, there wasn't a China who was making a significant investment in nuclear weapons. The unfortunate situation is that the life of our existing nuclear triad is becoming obsolete. We're at the end of life. And without the certainty of some of these treaties, now is the time we have to be making investments to do the modernization. So when you look at nuclear capabilities as being the #1 modernization effort of Russia and what the Chinese are doing, now is not the time to unilaterally disarm. So
Both we and Russia, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Right, no.
we're constrained at that number of 1,550
That's my understanding.
and applying it.
Right.
And that will be the case
Right.
into 2021, if
Right,
I understand that.
Chairman.
Senator, they're really an important point. First, I understand your concerns, and I would just say that, number one, the capabilities that we're fielding and the doctrine that we have is to reduce the probability for the use of nuclear weapons, and we do that informed by Russia. And as you know, we've now had 3 nuclear posture reviews across 2 administrations that have had very consistent findings in those recommendations. And by and large, with the exception of the low-yield missile that you mentioned, there's been consistency across all 3. You mentioned the 1,550, but there's also 2,500 non-strategic weapons that the Russians maintain as well. And when we look at Russian doctrine and we look at capability, we do, and I won't take too much time now, but we do see scenarios where the Russians believe that they may potentially be able to use those non-strategic nuclear weapons in Europe and then put the United States in a position where we only have an opportunity to respond with either strategic nuclear weapons or not respond at all. And so the low-yield nuclear weapon is actually designed to make sure that the Russians are convinced that there is absolutely no circumstances under which the use of nuclear weapons could result in a strategic advantage for them.
So how does that justify this increase in spending? The $2.2 billion for the Navy program of the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines, and the Air Force $3 billion, and $713 million for the long range, the LRSO, and the Minuteman III.
Senator,
so
first,
what you're doing is developing more low-class options.
we're developing a low-yield option to ensure that we have deterrence across the spectrum. But I would just, to put the cost in some context, again, we're implementing the results of the nuclear posture review at the peak for the most important mission in the department, which is to deter a nuclear war. At the peak, it'll be about 6%. So that's the peak of procurement. It'll be about 6% of the department's total obligation authority. And Senator, no question, we should seek to drive the cost down as low as we possibly can. But in context, for the most important mission the department has, having a safe, reliable, and credible nuclear deterrent is really what we seek to do.
So just so I understand this, you are in essence saying that you are going for this large expenditure. It's an increase of $94 billion over the CBO's prior 10-year estimate of $400 billion. And those are the numbers that you're going to follow? It's going to be that kind of an increase?
Senator, I'm not able to talk to the CBO's numbers there. The percentage I just gave you of our total obligation authority is an accurate number, and I'd be happy to take for the record the baseline that CBO is using and what they're basing their projections on. But what I can assure you is that this program is the one that has been supported again by 3 nuclear posture reviews in a row and by delays in modernization of the nuclear enterprise that we should have started this decades ago. And we now find ourselves with literally the description of the bow wave of modernization where all 3 legs of the triad and the nuclear command and control capability all have to be modernized at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Hoven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary and General, isn't it vital that we continue to invest in our nuclear mission in order to continue to make sure that we modernize it and, in fact, deter Russia and China as they continue to invest in their nuclear capabilities?
The modernization is vital as you see Russia modernizing and China. Now is not the time to disarm.
General?
Senator, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that is the effort that the department has underway right now, is to make sure that we have a safe, reliable, and a credible nuclear deterrent well into the future.
And that means the nuclear triad, all
That
three.
means the nuclear triad, and an important element of that is the nuclear command and control capability as well.
And do you feel that we are undertaking that nuclear modernization plan adequately to deter major adversaries like China and Russia that are making big investments in their nuclear capability?
Our initiatives are completely informed by the nuclear posture review that told us what it would take to deter the use of nuclear weapons by an adversary. And obviously Russia and China, as you highlighted, are the two most significant nuclear adversaries we face, but not the only.
Mr. Secretary?
No, I fully agree with that. The nuclear triad has proven effective over 7 decades. This is really about modernization more than it is about delivering new capability or changing our doctrine.
So the reality is we become less secure if we don't make these investments to upgrade and modernize our nuclear systems.
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Along with Senator Leahy and Senator Bozeman, I've introduced the Montgomery GI Bill Parity Act, which would allow members of the Reserve and Guard to utilize both the educational benefits under the GI Bill as well as the tuition assistance program, which active duty members can now do. And I would ask for your support for that legislation, both Mr. Secretary and General Dunford.
Yes, sir.
Okay, both are committed to supporting that.
We'll review the language, and I'm happy to.
Yeah, and we found, particularly for Guard members, that educational benefit is a huge factor in recruiting them, particularly a lot of these really high-tech people we need in some of these missions, and retaining them. Incredibly important. General Dunford, in regard to the Arctic, Secretary of State Pompeo, as you know, was in Finland, talked about the very aggressive posture of Russia and Chinese activities in the Arctic. Clearly, we need to do more. Do we have sufficient ISR capability in the Arctic? And I'm specifically talking about things like Global Hawk. Grand Forks Air Force Base, North Dakota, has that Global Hawk mission, has incredible reach, incredible potential to cover in the Arctic. Are we making the investment we need to, and is that the right kind of investment to make sure we're covering the Arctic?
Senator, first, we're making the right kind of investment, but in candor, I have to tell you that I don't think any combatant commander would tell you today that they have sufficient intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. We're probably meeting on a day-to-day basis. The recommendations I make to the Secretary probably meet somewhere between 30 and 40% of what the combatant commanders need. So there's a strong demand signal for additional ISR, and what we do for the Secretary is make recommendations of how to best allocate the ISR that we have today, and then as you'll see, we make continued investments in the future. And one of the reasons why we've invested more in space is that will be a significant enhancement to our overall intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capability.
Mr. Secretary, anything to add on that?
2 things. We'll never have enough ISR. I mean, I think just given the current capabilities that we have. The chairman made mention of this, but I'll just maybe even make it more broadly. Space will enable unbelievable amount of Earth observations. So by 2025, I mean, these are estimates, commercially, and this is where we need to really tap into commercial innovation, there'll be persistent surveillance of the globe by 2025. And so how we do ISR will completely change as we leverage space and its capabilities.
Final question then is for counter UAS capability. Again, being on the border, we have 900 miles of border responsibility out of Grand Forks. We have not only Grand Forks Air Force Base with ISR, RQ-4, but we also have Customs and Border Protection there, flying both manned and unmanned aircraft. What about countering the anti-UAS effort? We just passed legislation, preventing emergency threats legislation for DHS. Where are we in terms of your effort to counter some of the drone activity?
Yeah, I've spent considerable time with General O'Shaughnessy in Northern Command, because when we think about this emerging threat, I really do think of these UAVs as something that's low cost, it's easy to manipulate. We need to develop the capabilities and the rules, because quite frankly, this airspace is shared by so many different authorities. So it's as much about rules to operate in space as it is the technologies to defeat them. It is a high priority for the department. We've deployed a lot of capabilities, OCONUS. So in terms of evolving the ability to detect and defeat, we're progressing as a department. Now I think it becomes, how do we work with the FAA? How do we share the airspace so we can defeat this emerging threat?
Right, and DHS, because it's both battlefield and homeland.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Shanahan, President Trump stated in the national security strategy that a healthy defense industrial base is a critical element of national security, and that the industrial base is dependent on the ability of the nation's workforce and industries to surge at a time of need. Additionally, the Department of Defense issued an industrial base report last fall, which expressed some concerns, and I quote, currently, the industrial base faces an unprecedented set of challenges: decline of critical markets and suppliers, unintended consequences of U.S. government acquisition behavior, aggressive industrial policies of competitor nations, and the loss of vital skills in the domestic workforce. Do you agree with these statements and concerns?
I do.
If I too believe that a solid industrial defense base should be a national priority, and from both an economic and security perspective, I think we can no longer afford to be dependent upon foreign suppliers for critical defense components. However, as we've been having our subcommittee hearings, the services have testified in support of budgets and acquisition plans that perhaps give short shrift to this national priority and the administration's focus on supporting a healthy U.S. workforce as a national security priority. I know from my own Wisconsin experience that these workers are patriotic Americans who believe that their work in the industrial base is a service to their country. So, Mr. Secretary, can you commit to working with me to support policies, strategies, and solutions that both strengthen the industrial base and national security, and particularly those that support American workers?
Senator, happy to do that. Maybe I can just comment on the report you referred to. There was a classified annex to the report that we put forth, and in that classified annex, we identified the risks, and as you highlighted, some of them are capacity that's overseas that we need to move onshore. Some of it identified where we have only a single source of supply, where we have to find another source. And we also found companies that were underinvested and didn't have the investment capital to replace old infrastructure. That classified annex, we identified the most significant risk, and then we've put money against those items so that we can actually address some of those shortfalls. I recognize the importance of our workforce. Be happy to work with you.
Great. And thank you for pointing out the annex. I'll look forward to an opportunity to review that in more detail and continue the work together. General Dunford, is it accurate to say that the mission of the 5,200 service members in Iraq is to train and work with Iraqi forces in the counter-ISIS mission?
That's partially accurate, Senator. The most important thing that we're doing in the region is conducting counterterrorism to protect the homeland and protect the American people. But part of our mission in doing that is to enhance the capability of the Iraqis to consolidate the gains that were made as we cleared ISIS over the past 2.5 years.
Yeah. So not Iran, in other words. Are you aware of any evidence that would make Iran or the IRGC an associated force of al-Qaeda?
Senator, we probably couldn't talk about that in this venue.
Okay. I'll try another question. Secretary Pompeo went to Iraq to discuss a new threat stream from Iran. it seemed to me, at least at first glance, to be a completely separate bucket of threats from the ISIS threat and counterterrorism threat that our current military mission is addressing under the 2001 AUMF. Can you say anything about this new threat stream from Iran and whether you would view it in the same bucket, if you will, that the 2001 AUMF would cover?
Sure, Senator. I don't view that threat stream as being the same as ISIS, but our posture in the region has been to deter Iran really going back to 1979. And so when Secretary Pompeo raised the visibility of the threat streams that we had seen really intensify late last week, what we were attempting to do, both with the movement of force elements that the Secretary approved and the public messaging, was to deter any potential action by the IRGC or Iran as a whole.
While on Iran on this topic and the IRGC, General Dunford, were you consulted prior to the administration designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization?
Senator, I had an opportunity to provide military advice.
And did you agree with this designation?
Senator, if I could, because it's military advice that I provided, if I could provide that I'd be happy to provide that to you, but maybe not in an open venue.
What risk do you see the reciprocal response by Iran posing to U.S. service members?
We're watching that very closely, and that is what was related to the threat streams that we started to see last week. And again, what we're trying to do is mitigate that risk with a very effective deterrent posture as well as messaging.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What would the effect be on the military if we went back into sequestration?
I think it'd be devastating.
You agree with that, General Dunford?
I do, Senator.
Based on this conversation, it seems like the world's still a pretty dangerous place, right?
It's certainly my judgment that it is, Senator.
Okay, let's talk about Syria. The Syrian Stabilization Force, how's that coming, General Dunford?
Senator, it's coming along well in terms of the tasks we're trying to provide, as you know well, and we appreciate your help in this regard. We're training the Syrian Democratic Forces. We have sufficient U.S. and coalition forces right now to perform that mission, and the State Department has taken the lead on developing governance in those areas that have been cleared of ISIS as well.
Well, I think you've got a great plan, and to our allies, if General Dunford or others ask you to help, please say yes, because Europe was ravaged by ISIS attacks emanating from Raqqa, Syria, so it's your fight too. So I'm hoping that our European allies will invest in the stabilization force, not only for our Syria's protection, but for their own protection and ours. Idlib, President Trump said in September 2018, a tweet, President Bashar al-Assad of Syria must not recklessly attack Idlib province. The Russians and Iranians would be making a grave humanitarian mistake. Take part in this potential human tragedy. Hundreds of thousands of people could be killed. Don't let that happen. Do you agree that should still be our policy?
It is still our policy, Senator, and I think you probably know Secretary Pompeo is meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov twice in a period of 7 days, and I know that'll be part of his message.
Yeah. So are you concerned about increased military activity by Assad against the people of Idlib?
We have in recent weeks seen increased activity around Idlib.
Okay. Well, I hope the president will actually retreat, and I appreciate what Secretary Pompeo is doing. Afghanistan. Secretary Shanahan, do you agree that the reason we have troops in Iraq is to protect the American homeland from a rise of radical Islam?
I agree with that.
Okay. Do you agree that ISIS-K is getting larger, not smaller in Afghanistan?
I do.
Do you agree that a counterterrorism platform is needed for a while to come in Afghanistan?
Till the reduction of violence in Afghanistan is no longer a sanctuary.
Right.
Yeah.
It's in our national security interest to have a counterterrorism platform. Do you agree that we'll never get a peaceful resolution until Pakistan denies the Taliban safe haven?
I believe Pakistan plays an important role.
Do you agree with that, General Dunford?
I do, Senator.
Okay. Libya. Is it the policy of the United States in Libya to support a peaceful resolution of the dispute, not a military solution?
Correct, that's the policy.
Is that true, General Dunford?
It is, Senator.
Are we picking one side over the other?
No.
Do we still support the UN-recognized government?
We support a diplomatic solution to
Okay.
Libya.
I would recommend that you have the president or someone call the Prime Minister of Libya to let him know that the Haftar phone call was not picking sides. Do you agree that would be smart? There's been confusion?
Yeah, communication is vital.
Okay, good. You agree with that, General Dunford?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, we're almost done. Iran. If they restart their nuclear program, reprocessing, would you consider that a threat to the United States? Of nuclear fuel?
Senator, when we look at Iran, we see 4 threats that exist and 1 potential threat. So certainly a nuclear-armed Iran would be a threat to the United States, along with the use of proxies, the maritime threat, the cyber threat, and maritime threat.
Do you agree with that, Secretary Shanahan? So I think if Iran restarts their nuclear program, we should consider that a hostile act and put all options on the table. Finally, about Iran. When we send American troops to Iraq and Afghanistan to protect our country and our allies from the rise of ISIS, do we owe it to them to protect them from all threats?
We do.
Under the law of war, is it appropriate for a lawful force to defend itself against all threats, General Dunford?
That is consistent with LOAC.
So if the Iranians have designs on attacking our troops in Syria and Iraq, they're there to protect American homeland against the rise of radical Islam like ISIS. We would have the ability to defend ourselves if necessary. Is that correct?
Our forces deployed, make no mistake about it, Senator, have the ability to defend themselves. And everyone else.
In case the Iranians are listening, they attack American forces in Iraq and Syria or any other place at their own peril?
Our forces have the ability to respond immediately, and they don't need to come back to Washington to ask permission.
And you will make sure they're defended?
We will make sure to defend it, Senator.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you both.
Senator Murray, you're just in time.
Thank you. Apologize, Mr. Chairman, and I know you've all been here for a while, and just wanted a chance to ask you a couple of questions. Mr. Secretary, thank you for meeting with me yesterday. I wanted to ask you about the military sexual assault issue. We chatted a little bit yesterday about that, but the results of the new report really is disturbing to me, and the department's survey found that more than 6% of women service members have been sexually assaulted. When you include the men, that translates to about 20,500 service members who have been assaulted, and I have long pushed, as you know, the department to do more and have advocated for additional funding, new programs, including legislation to create the special Victims Council program. You know, for years we have heard from the department that the services have this under control, everybody's doing the right thing, but I just can't sit here today and continue to read these reports and say that I have confidence in the department's ability to put an end to this abhorrent behavior. So I wanted to ask you how you are going to address this problem. And what, you know, what the military is going to do. I mean, we keep hearing from everyone, you said it to me yesterday, leadership and all this, but it's not working.
Senator, first of all, thank you for the time yesterday, because I did a little homework between our meeting. I want to talk about that homework, just so I can put some context or to dimensionalize the situation, then talk about the actions that we're taking. And also, thank you for asking the question, because I think it's really important that we, talk about what's working, because there's many things that are working. And I think if we look back over time, and these were the implementation of recommendations from Congress, there are things that have improved, and then there are things that aren't working. So maybe I can talk about what's not working and what we're focused on to address that. There's kind of 2 aspects to our focus. One is on the largest population, the problem, and then also the system itself. So maybe I just talk about the report. So when we talk about the 20,000, I think you said
20,500.
assaults, that's an estimate. So that's not what's reported. So in the 2018, what was reported is the number of sexual assault cases that were dispositioned. There were 4,002 of those. What the department does is a survey, and that survey is to really get after the hidden side of this, because the actual number of cases don't capture everything that is happening. So there's a survey that goes out to all the members, and then they evaluate, it's not all the members, but a very, very significant population of the 2.1 million people. In that, they develop what's called a prevalence rate, and that's a factor then they apply to the number of cases that are reported. So they took that factor and applied it to the 4,002. That's how they derived the 20,000. And in that 20,000, the biggest population that's experienced the growth is women between 17 and 24. And that's where, if we said we want to really drive the numbers, that's what we'd focus on. And what we know about that population and these incidents is that it's peer on peer, that 85% of the victims knew the accuser, and nearly 2/3 involved alcohol. So for us as a department, the climate and the environment, that's where we need to be concentrated. When we look at the system, if you evaluate the report, of the 4,002 cases, about 29% of those were not within our jurisdiction. So if we look at how many cases we did and disposed of in 2018, there were something of the order of a little bit more than 2,800. Where there was sufficient evidence, we took action 100% of the time against the accused. Over half of those were court-martials, and the other half were other types of judicial action. We know we need to continue to improve the system itself, so that whether it's our ability to collect evidence, whether it's resources, accountability of commanders, or potential retaliation, that's also part of our focus.
Okay, well, I'm not here to parse numbers, and I hope nobody is. But I would just say that these reports are relevant over years, and there is there is an increase in numbers rather than a decrease when the military has been focusing on this for a long time. So whatever's been happening is not working, and I'm beginning to think that, although I've not supported it before, that we need to put controls on oversight out of the department, because we just can't accept this. And as I said to you yesterday, you don't want your daughter going into the military if a high % of women are victims of sexual assault, and something's not working. So I'm deeply concerned, and I'll continue to follow this, as I know a number of members will.
And we will work with you, and we don't accept the results, and we know we have to do better.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So you don't.
And thank you both for your service to the country. The most recent quadrennial defense review finds that near peer competitors, nations like China and Russia, are the top national security priority. This committee will need to find a way to pay for a huge increase in spending coming in the 20s to replace aging legacy equipment across the branches, including our strategic forces. And since 2001, we have spent trillions on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. One analysis found they have cost over $5 trillion, more than $23,000 for every American taxpayer. Those forever wars have helped put us in a huge budget hole. During this time, China and Russia have been watching our capabilities and working to meet or exceed our comparative advantage. Do you still agree that those near-peer competitors are our biggest national security threat? It's simple, kind of yes or no answer.
Yes.
Yeah, General Dunford.
Yeah, yes, Senator.
Yeah, and while Some in the administration are talking about inserting the U.S. military into at least 2 new additional conflicts, referring to Iran and Venezuela. The U.S. is still involved in Afghanistan 17 years later. The president has said that great nations do not fight endless wars. That's his quote, great nations do not fight endless wars. Senator Paul and I have introduced legislation to honor those who fought and to bring our troops home. Do you anticipate U.S. forces coming home from Afghanistan anytime soon, or are we looking at an indefinite garrison-type situation? How would you explain our current policy and the conditions for U.S. withdrawal to the American people in a clear and simple way?
Our current policy remains the South Asia strategy. Our best chance for peace, and this is probably the best in 40 years, is taking place right now. I would say our policy is to fight and talk. We're fighting the Taliban to pressure them into a reduction in violence.
Which we've been doing for a long, long time.
We have been. I think we're making progress.
Yeah, well, I think the numbers are that they control half the country right now.
The critical population areas, they don't control. I want to change territory with them. I think the areas where we have presence is of greater value and importance to the Afghan people.
Yeah.
Senator, if I could address this, I don't think anybody would want to withdraw our forces from Afghanistan or the broader Middle East more than me. But I will share with you the advice that I've provided now to 2 presidents. We have significantly reduced our commitments in Afghanistan. When I commanded in Afghanistan, we had over 100,000 Americans. We had another 30,000 NATO forces. We're down to about 15,000 Americans and 7,000 NATO forces. It's my judgment today, based on the threat from South Asia, that we need to continue to put pressure on those terrorist groups or they'll pose a threat to the United States. I know it's frustrating to you and the American people for us to be there for such a long period of time. It's just my judgment right now that the conditions for a complete withdrawal aren't there. The conditions for continuing to decrease our presence in the region as we have and increase the responsibility of, in this case, the Afghan forces to provide security for themselves, I think we can expect that to happen. And I would echo the Secretary, while I'm not anything other than realistic about the current negotiations we have in a peace process, it is the first time in many, many years where we've had some opportunity now to pursue a peaceful resolution to the war in Afghanistan. And at the end of the day, I don't believe there is a military solution. And I think we'll need to maintain a counterterrorism presence as long as an insurgency continues in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Mr. Shanahan, you recently said, and I quote here, Mr. Secretary, we really need to get back to our primary missions and continue to generate readiness, end quote. Your statement echoes General Robert Neller of the Marine Corps when he warned that a series of, quote, unplanned and unbudgeted tasks that included deployment to the border where there is no emergency constituted a, quote, unacceptable risk to Marine Corps combat readiness and solvency, end quote. Would you both agree that it would be better for military readiness and defense budgeting to keep our troops and DOD funds out of the highly charged political controversy about border security and immigration policy?
Yeah, let me just address my quote. My quote was, working with Chairman Dunford, we want to enable DHS to be able to manage their situation so that we don't need to provide continuing support. General Neller wrote a memo that said, unless certain funds are provided to him, he'll have to backfill them himself. And his message there was really around hurricanes, not around deployment to the border. It wasn't having any impact on him. We do need to solve the situation at the border. I mean, it's a humanitarian issue, and it's also a security issue. And the sooner we address that, I think the better off we'll all be.
General Dunford, do you have a comment
Senator,
on that?
the politically charged environment that you speak about aside, I'll just speak about it from an apolitical military perspective. We've had an historic role in supporting civil authorities in the Department of Homeland Security specifically. It goes back many years. Certainly, we would want that capacity that we backfill to be smaller than it is right now. DHS has some legitimate shortfalls. The Secretary and I have both visited the border. It's very clear to me that right now the Department of Homeland Security does not have the capacity to do their job. What I can assure you is 4 things. 1, everything that our men and women are doing on the border is legal. Number 2, they have the proper training, they have the proper equipment, and they have very clear instructions about what they're doing, and I'll continue to make sure that that's the case.
From a border perspective and being a border senator, I mean, I don't feel that Mexico is our enemy. I think these asylum-seeking migrants, largely from Central American countries, I don't think they pose a serious national security threat. I think we do have a humanitarian threat. We should be focusing on that and really come to the table and talk about that. But I really think you all should be focused on our national security threats, which we have many. And there are some out there that are talking, at least you aren't doing that here today, about getting us into other wars. So that's where I'm coming from. Really appreciate your testimony today, and thank you very much for your service.
General, just for the record here, tell us again what, in your judgment, what would happen in Afghanistan if we made a precipitous withdrawal?
Senator, there's about 20 groups in the region that I would describe as violent extremist groups. A handful of those groups have clearly demonstrated the intent to attack the homeland and to attack American citizens. I firmly believe that the pressure that our counterterrorism efforts have put on those groups over the last years have prevented another 9/11. Difficult to prove, but from the time I've spent in Afghanistan, I have been a commander there, and I am confident. And if you want to think about this in terms of term insurance, once you stop paying a premium, you no longer have insurance. And what we are doing in Afghanistan today, in my judgment, is a commensurate level of effort to the threat.
Thank you for your appearance, Secretary General, before the committee. We also know that I, along with others, are going to submit additional written questions for you, and would hope you'd respond to them within 30 days. Subject to that, the Defense Subcommittee will reconvene in a closed session next Wednesday, May the 15th at 10 a.m. to receive testimony from the U.S. intelligence community. This committee is recessed. Thank you.